everybody, welcome back to Tenza Motorsports. We have back with us our E46 wagon and the E46 M3. Now tonight I'm going to pull out the engine of the wagon. I've been going over in my head kind of how I want to set all this up, like scheduling, like what do I want to do first. And I think the fun stuff is going to have to wait until the end. So the seats, the steering wheel, that kind of easy, simple, fast gratification stuff where you're just swapping stuff around, I'm going to want to wait. And the reason for that is I'm going to be in and out of this car a bunch, and I would rather have the seats that are in there right now get busted up and moved around before putting the nicer seats in there, so I'm not damaging the nice ones. Now there is one more thing I want to talk about real quick before we get this started, is this right here. Every single time I have a brand new project come by, we find a small plastic bucket like this, and we just write like this one's the 2002 M3, and then you don't have to worry about your nuts and bolts. And then every time you lose one, you can come back to the bucket and you might even have one to replace it. Now I know that for my race car, I had a whole bunch of stuff left over. So I've got a ton in my bucket. It probably weighs 10 or 15 pounds. And it's a lot bigger than both of these. So this is just an M&M's one, and then this is just like a mixed nuts, which is ironic enough to have mixed nuts in there. But I always have one of these every single time we do a car. With the E46 Death Cart, I had one of these. It just makes it so much easier. Every time you pull off a screw, pop it in here. Now, if you do need to organize your nuts and bolts, like you want to do your front clip, you want to have all of it in the same thing, if you can go get one of those little plastic tray organizer things. I've got one over there on the workbench. I used that back when we were doing the M54 rebuild, so I was labeling everything and putting it away. But for this case, where we're not actually rebuilding an engine, we're just pulling it off, I'm going to be putting everything in here. Now that might be a little bit more dangerous for those who don't really know E46s that well if this is your first time doing it. I actually have a bunch of the nuts and bolts memorized, so when I go to put stuff back together, I already know what I'm looking for. But if this is your first time doing it, you might want to buy some drawers. But either way, those are fantastic to have around. It's been something that is small, but it makes such a big difference. So again, tonight I'd like to have the front of this off, and I'd like to have the engine and transmission out of the car. Once it's out of the car, we can then pull the S54 out of the M3, and then I'm going to be doing some work to that. We're going to be doing the Vanos, and then I am going to be doing the rod bearings on that. I have all the parts here. In fact, before we do the engine, let's go and open up a bunch of ECS tuning boxes I received yesterday and show everybody what exactly we got in the mail so that we can do this swap. All right, so the first thing we got is this big massive box here. It is only holding one thing. It is actually just holding the windshield cowl. These pieces on cars go out really quickly. It's being constantly exposed to the sun. So we got a new one because the one that's up there is actually missing this rubber in the back. That's what cracks and goes first. And then if yours isn't actually ruined, oftentimes I'll just repaint them. Just put some trim and bumper paint back on it, make it look like it was brand new. If it's still functioning properly, obviously. If it's broken or falling apart, you just buy a new one. So the next box here, I'm not gonna open this one up. It's just the rear rotors. I know that's what's in it because everything else is in this big box here. So onto this box here, we have our new clutch, which is just the pressure plate and the clutch. Then we have our replacement control arms. These are the non-M control arms, and they do have new bushings all the way around. So here are the two new rear ones, and then there is the new control arm. S54 oil filter. Here are the rear brake pads. Here are 6 upper and then 6 lower rod bearings. These are gonna be the ones that we replace. They tend to go out on the S54 at around 150,000 miles. This car isn't showing any signs of that, but you don't really see any signs, and then all of a sudden your engine is dead. So we bought these preventatively so that we don't have any issues with this in the future. This is the oil pan center gasket. Then we have some Vanos rebuild parts. We have the brake pad sensor. We also have a rear pad spring. These pads are to make sure that the wagon sits level compared to the M3. Then we have some more Vanos rebuild parts, some more rebuild parts for the Vanos system, same thing. And then we have here the exhaust manifold gaskets. So I'm hearing a lot of leaks, and I think it might be these. These weren't very expensive, so I bought 6 of those. We'll be replacing those when the S54 comes out of the M3, and that way, if that's what's leaking, then that's fine. If not, it's the other 2 smaller gaskets that sit back behind the catalytic converter. Those I can get locally. I already checked to make sure that was something that I could buy here in town. And then we have our connector rod bolts. These will put everything back together. These are torque to yield, so they do stretch. So the original ones that are in the car right now are ruined, and we're gonna need new ones. Those will be replaced when we do our rod bearings. Then the last thing that's in here are the set screws for the rotors. These just hold the rotors onto the hub so that when you take the wheel off, the rotor doesn't fall off as well. So we're gonna package all this back up because we don't need any of this tonight. We're gonna be taking the front clip off of this. Like I said, we'll be getting the engine and transmission out of the car. All right, so we just got a couple more things before we can pull the engine. We need to remove the exhaust or disconnect it. And the only other thing we gotta do is remove the transmission mounts and the engine mounts. I've already taken off all of this over here. It's pretty easy to work with, but we just got a couple more things. We'll go underneath the car here real quick. So this is what I'm worried about most, is these nuts that hold on the exhaust. These tend to get really rust really bad, and they can fight you a lot. So on my race car, when I was pulling these off, I basically ruined the studs going from the cat side, from the header side. So I'm hoping that that's not gonna be the case. We put some PB Blaster on them just recently. I was kind of hoping to, I totally forgot to spray these down. I should have done it this morning or yesterday or something along those lines. I was gonna spray these and then do the drive shaft, but you have to take off the exhaust before you do the drive shaft. So it's not a big deal, I guess, but we are gonna have to take these off, and that's the plan for right now. So as you can tell, it is not the same day. I lost my help last night. He had work in the morning, so I didn't want to do it myself, and we were starting to get really tired and frustrated, and I really didn't want to yank on the car very much. So the car itself needs to be in good condition. Even though I could, pull the engine out and be kind of rough and gruff with it, I wanted to make sure I wasn't busting something on the car. So a couple things that I didn't have to do on my last car when I was pulling the engine on the race car and then putting the engine back in is I did not have to disconnect the steering rack. So you can see up here, I've got the steering rack disconnected because where this connects to your input shaft, it was sitting too high right here. And so the engine was getting caught on that. And then the other thing that the engine was getting caught on was the headers, the flanges, just after the cats were getting caught on this piece, the other side. That's why we've got the other side off. And then we removed that, and then it caused another issue because then it was just sticking out straight, and so it got caught and got hung up for a little bit. But we ended up getting it out without damaging anything. We were a little bit rough with this engine, knowing that we're not really going to be using a lot of what's on this. There is going to be maybe some practical use for it in the future. We are looking at some different projects, maybe reusing that engine, but for right now, it's just gonna be put out in the backyard, maybe with a tarp over it during the winter, or maybe into the enclosed trailer. It depends on how mobile it is like this. Obviously, I don't have a forklift or anything like that, so it's gonna be kind of difficult to get this into the backyard. So we're pretty excited to have this engine out. At this point now, we're gonna be taking this car off the lift, putting the M3 up, then pulling the S54 out of the M3, and then swapping the cars again. In terms of tasks, pulling this engine out, pulling the S54 out, and then putting the S54 in, we are a third the way done. In terms of how much time and actual process, how long this is gonna take, I would say between the two engines here, we're probably about 10% in terms of actual time it's going to take to do this. So once we pull the S54 out, like we said, we're going to be putting it on the engine stand, and then we're gonna be replacing the rod bearings. So before the wagon gets pulled off the lift, we are gonna be replacing the control arms and all the bushings. I know that I've got new ones, so I'd like to do that. I wouldn't want to put these ones back together because then I'm just gonna go back and forth. So that's probably gonna be in the next video. Stay caught up with all of our stuff. We've got a lot of content coming up on these two cars. If you wanna see content early, check out our Patreon link in the description below. That's early access, ad-free. That starts at just $1 a month. Also check out our Instagram, link in the description below. We sell shirts and stickers. Just make sure to give us a quick DM if you are interested in either of those. Thanks again so much everybody for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.